Hi all my fellow vintage lens fans, I've been teasing you about my $1,000 Carl Zeiss Mini-Cine set for a very long time now, but in this video we will finally take a very close look at this set. We will talk about what went into building it and how you can build it yourself. So at the core of my set I have 5 Carl Zeiss Jena M42 mount primes from 20 to 35, 50, 80 and 135mm. But before I go into more detail about these lenses, I want to address a certain opinion that you will find on some internet forums. What some people think is that these lenses are not true Carl Zeiss lenses and only Contax Zeiss lenses are the true Carl Zeiss lenses from that period. I've done quite a bit of research on this subject and my simple conclusion is that both Zeiss Jena and Zeiss Contax lenses are true Carl Zeiss lenses, especially the ones that I have here. All of them are based on Carl Zeiss optical designs and all of them were made by Carl Zeiss engineers, same as the Zeiss Contax lenses. They are different optical designs and were made in different places, but nevertheless these are true Carl Zeiss lenses. It is true though that at some point Zeiss Jena was licensed to other lens manufacturers, so once in a while you might come across some random Zeiss lenses that you never heard of. Usually they will be marked as made in Japan and these lenses should be avoided. They have nothing to do with Zeiss and were not based on Zeiss optical formulas. Same goes for some German Zeiss lenses that are actually rebranded Pentagon lenses. So there are some things to look out for, but all of the lenses mentioned here as well as in my blog post are all true Zeiss lenses based on Zeiss optical formulas. There are some real gems in this set and yet nowadays they're very underrated because everyone is crazy about Zeiss Contax. But back to this set, let's take a closer look at each of these lenses. First off we have the Flexagon 20mm f2.8. This is the most expensive lens in this set and yet it's a very important lens because it will be your widest lens, the lens you will get all your wide angle shots with. For me it's as wide as I would ever need on full frame and it's wide enough for most of my Super 35 needs, but if 20mm doesn't sound quite wide enough for you, then you can of course combine it with a focal reducer to make it that much wider on Super 35 or even smaller sensor. Moving on from that we jump straight to 35 and a lot of you might think, why isn't there a 28mm in between? And while there is a 29mm Carl Zeiss Jena lens, I do believe that it's a rebranded Pentagon 29mm which itself is based on Meyer Optic 29. And while it's not a bad lens in its own right, at least my copy is pretty soft wide open and with such strong performance around it I just don't think it's a very fitting lens for this set. But if you really need a 28-29mm prime in your set, either one of these will probably still be one of the best choices to go with as far as matching to the overall set, especially if you can find it with red MC lettering on the front and the red lens markings on the side, so it at least will look and feel exactly at home with the rest of the set. But for me, I jump straight to this 35 because this lens is absolutely amazing. This is the Flexagon 35mm f2.4. I personally use it a lot as a taking lens for my anamorphic adapters, and if you know and use anamorphic adapters you will know that ideally you want to use a sharp taking lens to get the most out of your adapter, and this lens does exactly that. It's a very impressive optical performer in its own right, producing sharp, vibrant, lively images. Next up we have the 50mm. Every good set should have a nice 50mm prime, and here we have the Pancolar 50mm 1.8, which is not the sharpest lens in this set, but it's the fastest one, and by the time you stop it down to f2.8 it's as sharp as any of these lenses. And If you do really need that extra stop of light for maybe low light shooting, you do have that ability in there. And while it's not super sharp at that setting, it's still quite usable and it produces beautiful results with creamy bokeh and beautiful dreamy flares. It's the beauty lens that I reach for a lot. It feels great on full frame and it will be amazing on Super 35 with a focal reducer. So it's something that I definitely highly recommend as part of this set. Next up we have the Biometar 80mm f2.8, which is a dark horse of the set because it's the only lens here that isn't a native M42 mount lens. In fact, it's a medium format lens with a P6 mount, but as you can see, it looks exactly like all the other lenses and it feels very much at home here because you can add an M42 adapter to it to bring it in line with all of the other lenses. But if you're gonna take that further to EF, E-mount or Micro Four Thirds, you can buy an adapter that will go straight to that mount as well. But I went with the M42 adapter so I could then add quite special little mounts to it, which I will go into a bit later in this video. You might be wondering, is there no native M42 mount 80mm that I could get instead? And yes, there is, but that lens would set us back between $500 to $800, completely destroying our $1,000 budget. So I think this lens fits into the idea of this set much better. It's incredibly cheap for what it is. It produces great results with beautiful bokeh, very dreamy flares, thanks to that big element on the front. And I think this lens definitely deserves to be in this set. And last but not least, we have the Sonar 135mm f3.5, which is the slowest lens in the set, but it's also the cheapest lens here. So I think it's well worth having for those occasional telephoto shots. It's pretty good wide open, so you don't really need to step it down that much to get the most out of it. But if you do feel that 3.5 is just too slow for you, there is a 2.8 alternative for a little bit more money. A bit more info about that and some other alternatives will be found on my blog post, which you can find here or in the description below. But for me, this Core 5 represents a great value for money and I highly recommend each one of them. And now it's the fun part. We'll finally talk about what I did to these lenses to turn them into so-called Mini-Cine primes. Being vintage photo lenses, these lenses already kinda feel like cine lenses in a way, with their solid metal bodies, with their long focusing throws, smooth focusing rings with hard stops, manual aperture adjustment, a mount that can be adapted to many other camera systems. But there are some other things that can be done to these lenses to bring them that much closer to that cine lens experience. And this is exactly what I did here. When we think about cine lenses, there are certain aspects and features that come to mind. One of the most obvious is the follow focus gear. So this is exactly what I did to my set. I've added seamless follow focus gears to each of my lenses. I've used the Clickless focus gears because I believe they are possibly the cheapest seamless follow focus gears you can get, unless you are 3D printing them yourself. There are other things that I like about these gears, which I will not go into here, but you can check out my review on the website and find out more about them if you wish to. The next feature you will find in most cine lenses is a clickless aperture adjustment. This being photo lenses, they obviously had click stops between each setting on the aperture ring, so they had to be declicked. While declicking this particular lenses is very easy by simply removing a little metal ball from inside of the aperture ring. I highly recommend letting someone else do it unless you know how to do it properly. I've done my declicking with Ikoi Camera here in London, who also serviced a few of these lenses for me, so it made a perfect sense to do it all in one go. The actual declicking didn't cost much at all, and I highly recommend this service to anyone living in UK or willing to send the lenses here. But if you are in United States, for example, then of course there are lots of great companies there that will do declicking for you. Some are more expensive than others. I will have a few suggestions for you in my blog post as well. The next feature that you will often find in cine lenses are same diameter fronts. So every lens in the set will have exactly the same size front. And this is something that you often see in cine modded lenses also, with their 80mm step-up Cine rings that have 77mm threads inside, but we are slightly budget conscious in our $1,000 set, so instead I went for a similar idea but a much cheaper by simply buying 77mm step-up rings. So I have exactly the same fronts on all of my lenses now, and I can use just one filter on all of them, and if I need to set up a matte box for a particular lens size, I only need to set it up for one size and all of the lenses will fit in that very well. It also works very well with some of those full focus gears I have here. As you can see, it sits flush with the focus gear. The overall lens feels nice and chunky, definitely getting much closer to that Cine lens experience. For the next feature, we're switching from the front to the back of the lens, where I have the adjustable EF mount. For those wondering about the adjustable part, I have a new one here. It's made by this brand called Gihon. I don't know if other brands make them too. It can be a bit difficult to find this mount, but I will have a link in my blog post as well for anyone who wants to check them out. So this mounts basically come with a little Allen key, and you can adjust the position of the lens. To explain it a little bit better, if you look at a PL mount lens, you will see that it has 4 openings, and that means that you can put the lens on a camera in 4 different positions. So you can have your lens markers on the top, on the side, other side, and even on the bottom if you wish to. And it's a nice feature for focus pullers, camera assistants, or if you're operating yourself and you have certain preferences, you have that little feature with the Cine lenses. And with my adjustable EF mount, we can do exactly the same thing. By undoing these 3 little screws, we can rotate the lens to any position we like. So this is also a very inexpensive mod that takes them that much closer to the Cine lens experience. And to finish off my set, I've had these cool lens caps made for me by shootvintage.com with the focal lengths on the front caps and my branding on the back. So also a very inexpensive and a cool way to personalize your set. So this is pretty much all I've done to these lenses to turn them into a Mini-Cine set. Depending on how much you pay for them, you might decide to do all of the mods, or maybe you only need to do a few. There are some price suggestions for these lenses in my blog post. Obviously you will find it very difficult to find each of these lenses at its cheapest price unless you can wait for a long time and hunt down those bargains. But even if you average out the cost, you should have enough for the mods that I mentioned. And for $1,000, this finished set represents an amazing value for money. It's something that I can use pretty much for everything, from a corporate job with clean lighting where it will produce sharp, vibrant images, to something very creative where I might play around with lighting and bring out those flares, play with that interesting bokeh and everything else that vintage lenses give you in terms of character. And I think this is something that you want from a set. If that's going to be your only set anyway, you want it to be something that you can use for pretty much any kind of job, and I think this set very much represents that. Obviously you have other great options like Zeiss contacts and Leica R, very good options that a lot of people on slightly higher end will choose outside of the Cine lens world. But these lenses will cost you anywhere between $3,000 to maybe even $10,000 depending on the set you get. So if you want a $1,000 Mini-Cine set that you can use on most cameras, I highly recommend checking this particular lenses out. I hope you enjoyed this lens guide. Do let me know what other lens guides and other vintage lens related videos you would like to see in future, and I will surely see you in one of them.